Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener in the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. I love December. You would think, well, it's kind of an off season for gardening, but not really. There's a lot of Christmas trees, poinsettias, Christmas cactus.
Wreaths,
we'll talk about those wreaths, and so it's nice. And I also like looking out our window at the landscape because I'm already planning. I can see, well, here, I'd like to a little more color in that spot, a little more, it's like I've already got my gears going in my head for what I'd like to do. So I kind of like the maybe downtime a little, the quiet time to start thinking already for spring.
Yeah, it's kind of a good time to reflect and also looking out on the whiteness, if there's a good snow cover like there is here now, you can some things are still popping up or you can still see the structure of some things. So it gives it kind of a different look, which is nice to see.
It does. Plus in the snow, I can see the rabbit tracks. I can see where they're eating things and where. So I've done some protective fencing already.
So now can you see where they're not getting to?
Yes, now I can see because they've gone up to the fencing and turned around and headed other spots. So that's good. But so I like December. It's beautiful. And of course, what a wonderful time with so many nice Christmas plants. And I'm in the spirit. How are you guys doing at your house? Do you have your tree up?
Well, yep. The tree went up right the day after Thanksgiving. That's tradition. I think Sam would like to have it up probably around November 1st. But we hold off. We've got an artificial one, obviously.
Yeah, we've got our artificial up. We also put a real tree, fresh tree up, and that we're going to put up this weekend.
Nice. Yeah,
we keep it up well into January.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, keep it up for a while. And it's nice to have that even post-Christmas. It's nice to still have some of that festiveness, that color, and those lights.
Mary bought some poinsettias. Actually, she bought 4. It's fun to have poinsettias in the house. So we've got those in the house, and so it looks Christmassy at Kinsler's.
Well, actually today, December 12th, as we're recording this, is National Poinsettia Day.
Count the day lost, you don't learn something new. Until I wrote a garden column about this a week or so ago, I did not know, that there was a National Poinsettia Day. Oh, I got a question for you, John.
Yeah.
Is it poinsettia or poinsettia?
Well, it's spelled poinsettia, IA, but I always called it poinsettia.
Yes, I did too. And it's, I don't know, maybe it's a geographical type thing, but to me, poinsettia is kind of sounded like you were putting on airs.
Right. Well, the name, it's named after, I can't remember, it was
the first U.S. ambassador to Mexico in 1820-something, Joel Poinsett.
Yeah.
And so it ended with, his name ended in T, Poinsett, but along the way, they coined the name poinsettia. I don't know why they put the IA.
Sounds prettier, maybe?
Maybe. Yeah.
But poinsettia has been, no matter how you pronounce it, poinsettia has become kind of almost maybe the Christmas flower, the Christmas plant. Besides a Christmas tree and besides wreaths.
It's kind of a fascinating history. When Joel Poinsett became the ambassador to Mexico, when he traveled down there, he saw all these wonderful native plants. And in their native Mexico, they get big, 12, 15 feet high, a big shrubby type tree almost. And so he thought, wow, these are awesome. So he was kind of an amateur botanist. And so he took cuttings of them back to his greenhouse in, was it South Carolina, I believe? Maybe North Carolina. And so he took cuttings back and started them. And then somewhere along the line, they thought, these are just tailor-made for Christmas, the red and green of Christmas. And so then, the rest is poinsettia history.
Isn't that kind of great to have? It just makes you think it's great to have a mixture of maybe a politician or a representative and a botanist. Yeah, yes, let's get more scientists and people who are knowledgeable in other things other than policy. Yes, it's great. So he brought those back and he kind of got those going in the U.S. But still, most of the poinsettias are coming from outside of the area. But I guess you should say, because they're tropical, they're considered tropical. Most of them, they're grown very, very far south, but most of them are from outside the area, right? I think they're imported, but I think in California there's a fair amount growing, right?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I believe California is probably the number one producer of poinsettias. Now, it's interesting, and one reason for that is because a gentleman by the name of Paul Ecke, and he is the one that was intrigued, and this is going back to probably the 1920s. Okay, so Joel Poinsett, of course, brought him in the 1800s. But then Paul Ecke recognized the potential for these as becoming a Christmas plant. Okay, well, in their native Mexico, of course, they're big. Poinsettias can become massive. But Paul Ecke developed a kind of a secret formula for pinching and pruning the poinsettias and breeding them so that they would stay compact and make a pot plant. In our house, we probably wouldn't want a potted 12-foot big poinsettia. And so anyway, he developed this formula and started mass producing them. And so he took them had roadside stands and took them to kind of little marketing places in California, and it caught on. And so the Ecke family, his heirs and them, continued producing and breeding poinsettias. And so the wonderful potted poinsettias can be traced to the Ecke family. And in fact, now if you Google Ecke poinsettias, they're big producers of them. And so now December 12th being National Poinsettia Day, I believe that day marks... Okay, it was denoted National Poinsettia Day in honor of Paul Ecke.
Okay.
But the date was chosen for the anniversary of the death of Joel Poinsett. Okay. So it's kind of a combination of the man that brought them to the United States and the man who really got them marketed. So kind of an interesting thing, a success story in plants.
Yeah, not only did the Eckes really produce it, they kind of set up the production of it, but they really also set up the promotion about it.
Definitely.
I read that the son, Paul Ecke Jr., he had this great idea that he was going to send them free to television stations and talk shows to decorate the set, but just to have them out there so that people would see them and say, "Wow, that's great. I want those." And then he would be invited onto these shows so he could kind of talk them up. So it's just kind of a fun thing to do.
It is, and also fun are the different colors. And of course, the red is the traditional, but there were kind of mutations of white. Is a mutation. And then, of course, you kind of interbreed white with the red and you can get the pink. But now, a few years ago, did you notice the blue poinsettias?
Yeah, I started seeing those.
Blue, purple, lavender. And now I thought to myself, okay, I can see a white mutation off of a red, and I can see crossbreed to make pink. But, okay, in my head, I'm thinking, how did they develop a blue poinsettia? Okay, so I went to a store and I examined it and I peeked underneath, and under the colorful part, they're actually flower bracts, and underneath I could see white. So then I thought, okay, these have been spray painted.
Okay.
And they have. So then I did a little looking. And so the ones that are orange and lavender and purple and blue actually go through spray booths. Okay. So the ones that produce these poinsettias, they go through and put on a food coloring type thing. And sometimes you see they sprinkle a little glitter on them.
Yes.
And so it's pretty.
Yeah.
So they're actually spray painted. That doesn't sound very romantic, a poinsettia that's been spray painted, but they're pretty. You could do different decorating with them.
So it's not like a hydrangea where if you tweak the pH balance in
Correct.
in the soil.
Yeah, so they're white poinsettias that have been painted.
Well, no. So now one of the things with poinsettias is because they're beautiful, they're very full, they're very robust. They don't necessarily always last, but you've had some experience. You got to, I shouldn't say overwinter, but you kept a poinsettia around for a whole year plus, right?
Well, I always suggest to people who enjoy gardening, if you want a challenge, at least once during your life, you should try to save a poinsettia, buy a poinsettia, keep it growing as a houseplant, and then coax it to rebloom the following Christmas.
So how do you do that?
And so poinsettias bloom or produce their colorful bracts in response to short days. long nights, short days. That's why they bloom in wintertime out in their native. When the days have gotten short, then it triggers this production of the colorful flower bracts. And so in order to, so when you've got your poinsettia, this time of year, okay, after the holidays, the red part is going to disappear, drop away, but you keep it growing as a house plant.
Okay.
And then in the summertime, move it outdoors. Grow it like a container plant. Sometimes you move your house plants outside to a little bit of a protected spot, but give it a nice vacation outdoors. Maybe bump it up into a little larger pot, slightly bigger than what it is in now, and just grow it as a wonderful house plant. And then the tricky part to get them to color up, we need to make that poinsettia think that it's reaching the short days. Okay, now you'd think, well, our days are short, aren't they? Okay, but think about when you've brought this plant back in, it needs to come back in the fall before it freezes, of course, and think about all the lights in your rooms, or even a street light coming through a window. That is enough to make that plant think, oh, these aren't short days, I'm seeing light. And so in its native Mexico, where these are blooming, it would be dark, the absence of artificial light. And so the poinsettia growers in their greenhouses, they begin about late September or October 1st at the latest. They begin keeping the potted poinsettias in total darkness.
All 24 hours a day?
No.
Okay.
Good question. From about 5 in the afternoon until about 8 the next day.
Okay.
So think about natural short days of December when there were no electric lights or anything. It gets dark about 5 o'clock, doesn't really get light until almost 8 the next morning. So and we used to grow poinsettias for sale. And so every afternoon at 5 o'clock, we would pull big black cloths overhead over the benches. Or if they're very, very careful, if it's a closed greenhouse remote from any street lights, you could maybe not have to do that. But we would pull these big black overhead cloths, pull them up over the whole greenhouse benches. And so at home, starting at least October 1st, maybe a little earlier, you need to have your poinsettia in total darkness each day from 5 in the afternoon until 8 the next morning. But then at 8 the next morning, it has to have light. So in the greenhouse, we would pull back the black cloth, let it have light during the day. So now, how do we accomplish that in the home? Well, some people at 5 in the afternoon, right when you get home from work, stick it in a dark closet or stick a black garbage bag over it. And then when you go to work the next morning, take it off, get it back into the light. So you see from at least October 1st until it starts to color up, you need to every day give it its darkness, give it light during the day. And so you see, it's work. You work for that poinsettia. Yeah. That's why I say for people that enjoy gardening, do it at least once during your life to say you did it. Okay, and I wanted to say I did it. So a couple of years ago, I did it. I went through the whole process, and it got to be quite a nice size. When I say nice size, probably 2.5 feet high and wide. You see, in the greenhouses where they're producing them, you pinch them, you do the different things to put growth regulator to keep them compact and nice. So, well, anyway, I had this big, and I do have some photos of it yet. I actually wrote a garden column about it saying, oh, it worked. And so a big, 2.5 feet wide, maybe it was close to 3 feet high and wide. And so a really nice poinsettia. So it actually does work. Poinsettias aren't that expensive, and the flower shops do such a nice job. So it's not like getting a poinsettia on the cheap because right. you work hard for it, but it's something you can say, well, gosh, I actually did it and it works. So I suggest people, if they like growing plants, try it.
So you're talking about like the key there is kind of this absence of light for a big part of the day. What about temperatures? Because the poinsettia it's a tropical plant. Here we are, in December in North Dakota, Minnesota. It's not tropical. What kind of temperatures does it want?
So the trigger to get poinsettias to color up is total day length, not temperature. Because they are tropical, they like warmth.
Okay.
And so unlike the Christmas cactus that we're going to talk about in a few minutes, those are triggered by some temperature differences. But the poinsettia likes it warm. In fact, when you buy a poinsettia, and many people have probably already bought it, but it's really important to wrap that poinsettia at the store on the way out to your vehicle. In fact, Mary bought some poinsettias around Thanksgiving. I think it was Black Friday. And she was amazed at the national chain stores. It was cold that day. The number of people that were buying poinsettias, but just grabbing them and taking them out to their vehicle. Now, taking a poinsettia out on a winter day with no covering, it's kind of like taking a baby out with no clothes on. We wouldn't think about that. So poinsettias need to be wrapped. Now, the locally owned garden centers and flower shops, they do a nice job of wrapping and closing your poinsettia in and taking it on out. So, and of course, Mary's background was flower shops. So she knew at the national chain store where she bought the poinsettias. We also, by the way, we love poinsettias, so we bought a couple at at the locally owned garden centers too, because oftentimes they're a little bigger.
Yeah.
And so anyway, Mary knew to wrap them up before she headed out to the car in the parking lot. Otherwise, they can be irreversibly damaged.
It's almost like they get frostbite.
Exactly. Yeah. And it doesn't even, it can even just be a couple of seconds.
Over the years, I've picked up some kind of as an impulse buy, like at a grocery store or something like that. And I've learned that when you buy it, yes, get an extra bag if they have one there.
Sure.
And put it over the top, squeeze that all in there. Or if you know you're going to go out and buy one and it's cold out, I've done this before. I just carry a trash bag in my car.
You read my mind, John. I was going to mention, because sometimes they don't have a bag big enough always. And so, stick a garbage bag in your pocket when you're heading out to buy poinsettia. And then I like to puff some warm air into it and close the top up, and it almost makes like a bubble of nice warm air around the poinsettia.
Sometimes poinsettias have a reputation. Maybe it's because when it's kind of done with the season or it's season, it's the colorful flowers will fall off. But like, what about water wise? What is poinsettias? How should we treat those?
And sometimes we're so cautious. We don't want that poinsettia to die on our watch before the holiday seasons are done. So we'll overwater them. Now, poinsettias are more related to a cactus and a succulent than they are maybe other types of plants. And so because of their succulent nature. So have you ever taken a leaf off of poinsettia and notice that waxy kind of latexy milk?
Yeah.
And so they have inside, instead of just kind of water, they've got that milky type sap, which is more common to succulent type plants. And so they don't want to be overwatered. So it's better to err on the side of dryness. So when trying to decide if a poinsettia is it time to water it, feel the soil. And if it feels damp, don't water. But, if you insert your finger up to the first joint and don't feel any moisture, then go ahead and water. But don't just give it a few little sips. Give it enough water to thoroughly wet the potting mix and then let it become really, really dry. Again, the quickest way to develop root rot on a poinsettia and get it to just collapse is to keep it overly wet. The other thing that I mentioned, and of course, Mary is strong on this because of her florist training, is a lot of the poinsettias come in a kind of a decorative foil sleeve.
Yeah.
So Mary, the first thing she does when we get them home is to, with a knife or scissors, just poke a hole in the bottom and then set the poinsettia pot in a drainage saucer.
Yep.
And because if the water ponds up in the bottom of that decorative container, it will very soon wilt from root rot. And so, let them dry out really, really good.
And we should say, too, poinsettias, they have a reputation, undeservedly, for being poisonous and toxicity, especially to animals.
That's got a fascinating history, John. In the early 1900s in Hawaii, a child ate or chewed on poinsettia leaves, and the child died. Yes, the child did die, but it was totally unrelated from chewing on the poinsettia leaves. But that was enough to cause poinsettias to have the reputation of being deadly poisonous. And as far as late as 1972, the Food and Drug Administration sent out warnings saying poinsettias are highly toxic, Keep them away from pets, children. They're poisonous. But Ohio State University in early 1970s decided to actually test this because it had never been researched before. So they fed lab rats huge quantities of poinsettia leaves, and the rats did have a reaction. They gained weight. And of course they replicated the study and do all the good things researchers do, and so it was determined. In fact, a Canadian, I believe he was a researcher on national media. To debunk the myth, he ate poinsettia leaves and showed the media that no problem. But now, just because they're not highly deadly poisons does not mean we make a salad out of them.
Right.
Because they have that latex kind of milky sap, they can cause irritation to both the skin, in the mouth. If pets chew on them, they might vomit. Nobody's going to die, either humans or pets, but they can cause irritation. So if pets or children are prone to nibbling on leaves, put the poinsettia up and away so that they don't do that. But at least we're assured that they are not deadly poisonous as they once thought.
All right. Well, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, let's talk about some other kind of holiday plants.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
All right, we're back and we're talking about holiday plants. We were talking about poinsettias earlier, but another big one is the Christmas cactus, and that's something that you see a lot of now, or that you see more of. I think actually I think that's kind of growing in popularity, and I think because cactus, like succulents, those are gaining popularity for people who don't necessarily have a large space. But then also the great thing about Christmas cactuses, they can last for a long, long time, right?
Oh, man, yeah. Because I've been sent photos over the years of people who have their great-grandmother's Christmas cactus. And so they're wonderful heritage plants. By the way, I suggest to anyone that does have a heritage houseplant, propagate it so that if you're the one person that inherited great-grandmother's Christmas cactus, you don't want it to die on your watch. But if you propagate it from cuttings, almost any heritage type plant, propagate it, because that cutting that is taken from that plant is the plant. And so just as a backup plan, propagate that plant in case anything happens to the one. But yes, so they can last many, many years. In fact, a few years ago, I solicited comments. Send me some comments on your heritage houseplants, and the Christmas cactus was one of the leading heritage houseplants. I believe there was one that had a record going back to about 120 years.
Wow!
And so they can last years and years. They don't need frequent repotting, which is a plus. And so they can stay in that size pot for quite a few years too. So let's talk about those. Now, it's interesting, and I'm seeing on Facebook lots of people sharing pictures of their Christmas cactus. And now, so if you do see pictures of someone sharing their Christmas cactus, take a close look. And the reason I want you to take a close look, enlarge the picture a little bit so you can see the stem pads. See, these cactus do not have really leaves. They have stem sections that are called pads. They're kind of jointed, along the part that hangs down. These stems are flattened kind of pads that they're called. And so the reason I want you to take a look is because there are 3 types of these cactus, and sometimes now you hear them called holiday cacti. And so there's the true Christmas cactus. That's the one that is probably the oldest, and that when someone shares a photo of their grandma's Christmas cactus, it usually is that species. But also slightly newer over recent decades is the one called Thanksgiving cactus. And the Thanksgiving cactus tends to bloom a little earlier, but we'll talk about the bloom times in a minute. But that one tends to bloom a little earlier. That's why Thanksgiving instead of Christmas cactus, the name. And so now take a look at the when you're looking at a photo, or maybe you've got your own plant and you're wondering, is it actually a Christmas cactus or the Thanksgiving cactus? So take a look at the stem pads, the flattened pads, and take a look at the joints where each of the pads are kind of joined together. Christmas cactus has just smooth, scalloped edges on that. And the Thanksgiving cactus, in fact, I brought a little picture along, so I'm handing it to John there, the difference.
Oh, yeah.
And you see the Christmas cactus, the joints and the lobes are smooth. The Thanksgiving cactus, along its stem pads, have very noticeable prongs on it.
Yeah.
And so immediately you can look at the difference. So if your cactus has prongs along it, kind of at the joints and also kind of along the pads themselves, there are very noticeable kind of tooth-like prongs, very prominent. And so that means that's the Thanksgiving type cactus. So now occasionally, fairly regularly actually, you'll notice people have called their Christmas cactus a Thanksgiving. What is actually a Thanksgiving cactus gets called a Christmas cactus. The blossoms are very, very similar. Now, a lot of the newer types that you'll buy at a flower shop are actually the Thanksgiving cactus, and there's a reason why. The Thanksgiving cactus, since it comes into blooming a little earlier, they can start marketing those. We start marketing Christmas stuff early.
Yeah.
Don't we?
Yeah.
Each year a little earlier. Okay. And so the Thanksgiving cactus, it comes into bloom earlier so they can start selling that. But now I noticed that in a lot of the flower shops, they don't mistakenly call it a Christmas cactus. They call it a holiday cactus. And that's fine.
Yeah.
That's totally fine. But it's kind of a fun little trivia thing. And I mean, plant people are not judgmental of others. I never, if somebody on Facebook has mistakenly called the Christmas cactus, I never. We don't judge people on that.
Right.
But it's just kind of a fun little thing. So we're not about to correct people that, actually you have a Thanksgiving cactus. But it's just kind of fun to know, and it also can explain why that is maybe blooming.
A little earlier.
Yeah, the like I say, the heirloom type are usually the Christmas cactus. And so I encourage people to propagate those because we don't want to lose that species.
How do you do that?
And yeah, good question. So you take a couple of these stem pad sections, a little cutting. So we're probably looking at maybe a 3 to 4 inch long cutting containing a couple of pads, and they'll just break off. And so you just barely cover the end, that you snapped off, barely cover that down in some potting mix. I'll use just a good all-purpose, high-quality potting mix, and just put the cut end down in that, and it might take a good month or so, but it'll root and start sending up a new little tiny leaves of a new one.
When should you move that from then a small little, or do you want to start it in a bigger pot?
Yeah, I started in a very little pot.
Okay.
If you started in too big of a pot, it would tend to just stay too wet.
Okay.
So started in a little pot. So I'd maybe started in a 3-inch diameter pot is about all, and grow it in there until you actually see some growth starting. And so they're fun to start. You could use a cactus and succulent mix for those too. That would be good, well-drained. You could even use straight vermiculite or perlite. Those things root well in those too. But rather than in water, which tends to be too wet.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that, because cactus, you think of that they don't need water that much. How do you know when to water?
Yeah, you bring up a good point about these cactus. Now, when we think of cactus and succulent, we think of the desert type. But the Thanksgiving and Christmas cactus they're cactus of the tropical jungles. So they're not desert type cactus, they're tropical type cactus, native to tropical rainforests. In their native habitat, they're growing on decaying trees, tree stumps, maybe kind of the crotch of a tree where some moss develops. And
so moist areas.
Yeah, moist areas, exactly. And when you think of it, they kind of need to trail down, so living on kind of an old, dead, rotting tree would be just perfect. And so, yes, especially when they're in blossom, they need to be kept moist enough or the blossoms are going to drop. So think tropical when you think your Christmas cactus instead of desert-type cactus. And so especially once they set buds, then it's important to keep the moisture a little more so. And the rest of the year, water them like you would other houseplants. Don't let them become bone dry like you would a desert type of cactus.
Are they susceptible to light, to flower too? Is it kind of like...
they're fascinating. And a common question is, how come mine isn't blooming? Now, the fascinating thing about these holiday-type cactus, and the same holds true Christmas, Thanksgiving, and there is actually an Easter-type cactus, too, that blooms much later. That one has a little different look, too, again, to the pads and the flower. But anyway, they have a trigger of two things. The short day, long night, similar to poinsettias, the short days of winter, but also comes into play is temperature. Okay, so let's talk about that whole thing. Okay, one of the easiest ways to get these Christmas cactus, holiday cactus to bloom is by giving them a summer vacation outdoors.
Okay.
It's kind of fun. Move some of your houseplants outdoors and leave it out in the fall of the year until temperatures drop below 50. We obviously don't want it to freeze, but when temperatures get in the high 40s or low 50s, that cooler temperature will trigger that plant to start the formation of some flower buds. Okay, so giving it that. Okay, if you don't want to give them a vacation outdoors during the summer and early fall, and you want to keep it indoors, make sure that it's in a spot that gets kind of chilly at night. Now, a reason great-grandma always had hers blooming, she probably had these up in the good living room, dark at night, and old houses probably chilly.
Drafty.
And so it got the combination of cool temperatures and also the long nights, short days, which triggered. Okay, so now in a person's home, we have lights on at night, so it probably is not going to get that darkness. But if you locate it in a room that's a little chillier, which gets down maybe below 60. Now, many of our homes we maybe don't let get that cool, but there are microclimates by windows. So choose a window. In fact, it's kind of interesting. Our house is old and drafty, so we have no problem having a window that's going to get down maybe upper 50s, low 60s. And so locate it by a chilly window and let it be in that chilly window. And those temperatures will be enough to trigger that blooming. So then you don't even have to give it the long, dark night. Sometimes, when you'll see on Facebook or whatever, it won't bloom, people say, well, you need to cover it at night. If the temperature won't drop cool enough, then covering it at night and then removing it each day like that, like we did poinsettia, that darkness can trigger. But they are so temperature sensitive that if your temperature of the house, of the room, stays 70 degrees or above at night, and some people do keep it that warm at night, that cactus will not bloom. And so that's the reason for putting it in a chilly window.
We were talking about the poinsettia. Some people will put that in a closet. It seems like the Christmas cactuses, those are, I don't want to say fragile, but like if you move them around, they'll drop off.
Yeah.
Some of the
pads will drop off. And also, once they do set those flower buds, if you start kind of moving it around, then they can easily drop also.
So just kind of find a good spot and let it be there.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And the other thing that's fascinating about those is some people's Christmas cactus, Thanksgiving cactus will bloom again later. Such as towards spring. But again, it's if they're getting enough cool temperatures, it'll trigger another set of bloom. And that's why a person can't go on the timing of it. Sometimes I get a kick out of it on Facebook. Sometimes I'll see somebody that's blooming, I don't know, March or so again, and they'll wonder, gosh, must have been confused. But again, it's a temperature trigger. The cactus itself doesn't really know which holiday it's in. They're triggered by the day length and the temperature.
When it's blooming, how long will that also affect if you're in a perpetually, if the climates are ideal for it, will the blooms be longer? Will the longer lasting blooms? Or is it a matter of kind of once it expends that energy with that flower, it's going to last for a set amount of time?
But, that's a good point. If it's in kind of the ideal spot that triggered the blossoming, the bud formation, then that will also help prolong. For example, where it was getting kind of chilly at night, if it continues to get chilly at night, they'll last longer. If you were to take that and move it to an area exposed to furnace heat and things, then the flowers are going to drop much quicker.
All right.
But aren't those fascinating plants? Yeah, and the triggers, that it gets. And a person might think, well, gosh, in the tropics, is it really getting that cool? Well, some of those nights during winter, the tropics can get down to at least the low 60s, but also then the darkness is also coming into factor for that. So an interesting interplay of the day length and temperature for triggering blossoms.
I love the fact that too, these two holidays that we associate with family, Thanksgiving and Christmas, and gathering together, but that you can have, basically you can have something that a relative who's no longer with you, because these heirloom plants, you can have something that's part of them with you for these celebrations.
There was at their Christmas 100 years ago.
Yeah, that's really great.
It is.
Well, let's take another quick break and we'll talk about some more holiday plants.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back, and this week we're talking about holiday plants. We talked about mistletoe, talked about Christmas and Thanksgiving cactus. Let's talk about amaryllis. This is another one that is really kind of, you're seeing more and more variety in there. I think there are something like 600 varieties of amaryllis out there.
Well, what's fun with amaryllis, and of course you see them boxed up in either garden centers or national chain stores. You see them boxed up, and the directions say just put the bulb in the pot, in the potting mix, water it, and it'll bloom. And they actually do.
Yeah.
Yeah. The promise is well fulfilled. And so, the key to that whole thing is that big, beautiful trumpet-shaped blossom is all preformed down in that great big bulb. So all it has to do is be watered and start to go.
Push its way up.
Yeah, exactly. And, one of the neat things, too, over the last couple of years, you've seen the ones enclosed in wax.
Yeah.
And so that wax seals in the moisture, and of course the bud is all preformed, so it just has to follow the directions on it, and poof, up comes that huge, beautiful thing. So if you want to keep your amaryllis going, if it is in one of the wax type shells after the season, after the blossom is done, pot it up.
Okay.
Yeah, pot it up. Take off the wax coating. It should kind of pry off and then pot it up. So the easiest way to grow an amaryllis, I think, is to keep it growing as a houseplant all year long. They're tropical in nature, and in their native tropics, they pretty much keep growing. But fertilize them at least once a month. The key to building up a big flower bud again, it's going to take energy and it's going to take nutrition. So fertilize with a Miracle Grow type at least once a month on that. And so if you keep growing it as a houseplant, and you could give it a summer vacation outdoors. That does it good too. And then when it builds up enough energy, it will bloom again. They're kind of a pretty houseplant, the long strap-like leaves. And so they'll bloom again, hopefully in a year if the nutrition is good. But now you also see that there is a secondary way to trigger the blossoming, and that's to let it go dormant. After it's done blooming at the end of the holiday season, you start letting it dry down, and then give it, when it's totally all yellow, then you just set it maybe down in the basement in a spot and give it a few months of dormancy, and then And then getting towards maybe October or so, bring it up, start watering it, and it will bloom. But now I think that's kind of a cumbersome way. I just like to keep it growing as a house plant. And then when it gets enough energy, it'll send up a flower stalk.
So when you keep it as a house plant, you never have a dark period.
No,
you never put it in a closet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Isn't it fun the way these different plants all have kind of different
triggers.
Triggers. Exactly. Yeah. And no, the poinsettia, the trigger for blooming is whenever it builds up a big enough flower bud down in, it'll start sending it back up. The amaryllis, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And it's a fun plant, and it's as opposed to the poinsettia, which can be, like you said, 2 feet wide. It can be really big. Poinsettia just goes straight up. And
so the amaryllis amaryllis are very much worth keeping because they don't take up so much space. And like I say, you have your choice. Keep it growing as a houseplant or go through the dormancy thing and then start it. And
you can buy the kind of the kit in a box, and you can find them in hardware stores. You can find them but if you go to a garden center, I went to one this weekend, they had, I think, maybe 8 different varieties. You can see the picture, and you just buy the bulb.
Yes.
Because I've got plenty of flower pots. I've got plenty of potting soil at home. So I bought one for my mom, and I think that they're just kind of a great thing.
The other thing that's fascinating about the amaryllis bulbs is they always look like it looks like they're sticking out of the pot too far because if you've done it right, about half the big bulb is up above soil line.
You don't want to bury them.
Yeah, exactly. And so I get a kick out of it. And they always look like they're in, 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. It always looks like they need a bigger pot, but they don't. As long as you've got maybe no more than an inch on either side of the bulb, that's the way that they should be. So they don't even require a very big pot.
What do you want for moisture on those level? How much watering should you do?
I like to call it a water as you would your other house plants.
Okay.
Not like a desert type cactus, and not like a fern that you maybe keep extra moist, but water like you would your other houseplants. When you stick your finger in, and if you feel moisture down at the tip, don't water. But if it's dry at your fingertip, then go ahead and water. And that's kind of the rule of thumb. And anytime you do water that plant, water enough so that the entire soil ball is moistened. Now, when plants are in full blossom like that, then don't let it dry out quite as much as you would otherwise. When things are in full blossom, then maybe they're requiring a little more moisture. So during the time when that great big trumpet-shaped blossom is in full bloom, then maybe don't let it dry out quite as much as you would regularly.
You said if you're going to keep it as a houseplant, to fertilize it monthly. Should you keep on that cycle, like once you get to October, November, December?
Yeah, I would.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd keep that up year round.
12 months.
And boy, it's interesting too. The bigger the bulb, the better the flower you're going to get.
Yeah.
So it is worth it, like at garden centers, paying a little more if you really want. Because I've seen some people whose bulb has sent up 3 flower stalks, and on each stalk was probably 3 blossoms at least. So 3 times 3, about 9 big trumpet-shaped blossoms off of one bulb.
Have you ever used those blossoms as you cut them off and use them in like just in a vase just to see? I wonder how long they would last.
But that's a good question.
If you wanted to do an arrangement.
Awesome. Yeah, an arrangement of those would be awesome.
When I've read that the bulbs can last for 70 years.
Oh, yes. Yeah, long lived.
So again,
and that's why they're very worth just keeping going, keeping it growing, enjoy it. Yeah, because they'll last a long, long time.
I took one, I haven't done this for a while, but I took one from Christmas that had blossomed and kept it in the house for a while. And then once summer came, I put it out in the garden in front.
Oh, yes.
And, again, because like you're saying, the big strappy leaves, it adds a nice thing. I got another bloom out of it in the middle of summer.
Oh, sure. Awesome. And it got nutrition. You gave it nutrition.
Of course, the bad thing is I forgot to bring it back inside until it got too late. So
well,
it didn't.
Then there's that. Yeah, there's frost.
It's a learning thing. So
that's right. And you shared an interesting statistic that U.S. imports 10 million amaryllis each year from Holland and South Africa.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I did not know that South Africa was maybe a leading producer. And of course, Holland, you always think of bulbs. So that's a natural. And of course, tropical zones 9 to 11.
Very warm.
So that's very, very warm.
A lot of things with the amaryllis and the poinsettia, you hear stories, especially around anything kind of associated with Christmas. A lot of time there are myths and legends, things like that, and that are or symbolism, and that both of those people say, well, the flower represents or symbolizes the Christmas star, right?
Oh, yeah, sure.
But then you think about it too, is like, well, a lot of flowers are star-shaped. That's just kind of the natural bloom of them. So it's interesting. One of the maybe not even newer ones, but another one that you can find out now, especially in bigger box stores, is paper whites.
Yes.
Was it narcissus?
Yeah, narcissus, kind of daffodil.
Yeah.
Daffodil type relatives. And those are fun.
Yeah.
That's another case where you just follow the directions and they do what they say. They'll bloom.
That is like amaryllis, kind of good gifts ideas because they will come in kits, and they're good for. I had some when I lived in an apartment, and maybe wasn't great about taking care of plants, but they didn't need a whole lot of. You don't have to fertilize them. They do their thing, then they go. I can
see these as good gifts even for kids.
Yeah,
almost a home science project, because when things perform this well like that with very, you don't have to fuss with them too much. I can see kids getting triggered into a whole lifetime of gardening by those.
Now, a couple of the other Christmas plants, there are things that maybe we don't find around here, but wanted to see what your thoughts were. Have you ever seen holly in real life?
Yes. A couple of years ago, we were in Boston and walking along. And of course, it's fun being in a different geographic area. You see different trees, shrubs, etc. And it's kind of fun to see, can you identify it? And anyway, we were walking along in Boston, and all of a sudden, man, my head turned, because here was this great big pyramidal tree, kind of like we would have a pyramidal arborvitae.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, my head turned. Holly. It was a great big pyramidal, I suppose, 25 feet tall, holly. It did not have the red berries, but the waxy pointed, and I had to touch it. They're prickly.
Yeah.
And I had to touch it. And wow, I had not seen a live growing holly tree before. And like I say, it had foliage all the way to the ground, almost like a beautiful arborvitae. So holly, that's fun.
I never see it around here, neither as grown or in stores.
No.
Maybe if I went to a florist or
right, yeah, I think the florist shops sell holly. The other thing that's fascinating too is mistletoe.
Yes.
And of course, if you do a little online searching, the whole history of how did mistletoe ever get connected with kissing somebody under the mistletoe at holiday season. But, mistletoe is a fascinating plant. It's a parasite. It grows on other trees. It uses their nutrition and the different the structures of the mistletoe can connect in with other plants, and so mistletoe is actually kind of a parasitic type plant.
I'd read that it's it's kind of associated with, or it can be, what do they call it? The witch's broom that can be in a tree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
This kind of outcropping of.
So how this parasitic mistletoe ever got connected with Christmas, but when you do some reading, it's got an interesting long history. And of course, some of it is probably not 100% true.
Right. But it becomes tradition, and it becomes the lore of these things is used. And so it's, there are a lot of, like you said, that here we are in midwinter, early winter, it's cold out, but there's still so much going on in plants that we can really get excited about, that you can go out and see, you can bring into your home, and you can try to keep going throughout the year.
Yep. So December is kind of a month all of its own, isn't it? With lots of good things happening.
Well, if people have questions about their holiday plants, or if they would just want to send you pictures of their successes.
Yes, or if you've tried doing a poinsettia.
Yeah.
Let me know. Yeah, once a couple of years ago, the nuns at Hankinson, North Dakota, the Franciscan convent.
Okay.
After I had written about that everybody should try it, they sent me photos. They had done it and tried it. They were wintering and getting their poinsettias to rebloom for Christmas. So anyway, yes, send me emails.
What's the best way to reach you?
Donald.Kinsler, KINZLER, at ndsu.edu. And like I always say, we're all in this together, so it's just fun to share successes, questions, everything else.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks, everyone, for listening.